When Clash Royale was launched, it came with mistakes that would never quite be able to be fixed even to this day. Without a clear image of what the game would look like in its long-term future, certain mechanics were added to the game that would later be realized to not fit well into the current Clash Royale landscape. The problem with the game is most of the mechanics that were in Clash Royale originally were taken directly from another game, Clash of Clans, which was a village building and attack game, unlike Clash Royale being a real-time tower defense game. However, the card we're going to talk about actually wasn't based from Clash of Clans at all. This card was a troop, a building, and a spell. A card whose purpose would only be to enhance the power of already strong cards. A card that would be impossible to balance, leaving the only option to be keeping it in a weak state permanently so that it could never disrupt the game's meta ever again. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the Mirror, a card that is one of the most infamous cards in Clash Royale, and although whose sole purpose is to copy other cards, is ironically probably the most unique card in all of Clash Royale history. So now let's take a deep dive into Clash Royale's Mirror, why it exists, its various impacts on the game, the changes that it went through, and why it will likely never be changed ever again. The Mirror is one of the OG cards in Clash Royale, being released day 1, which was on January 4th, 2016. Back in this period of the game, nobody could grasp an accurate sense of which cards were truly good or bad. The game was completely new and people just didn't know how to play it yet. This meant if you could understand some of the basic interactions, any card could really work for you. At this time in the game, there were only 42 cards, 14 commons, 14 rares, and 14 epics. Epics went up to level 8, whereas commons and rares only went up to level 12 and level 10, which both equate to a level 7 epic, so all epic cards already had an advantage just by being an epic. At least they did at the maximum level, which most players couldn't get at that point anyway because progress was slow. Now, because there were only 42 cards in Clash Royale, Mirror was more useful than it may seem on the surface because there weren't as many options for substitutes of cards already in the game. The power of the Mirror over time was certainly diminished partially because of more cards being added. However, looking at the Mirror even in the context of the meta being chaotic, it was clear that Mirror was likely one of the worst cards in the game. This is because the Mirror worked much differently than it does today. At least if you take the card's stats at face value. I'll explain more in depth in a little bit. Although you still had to spend one additional elixir to mirror a card, instead of getting the benefit of at least getting it one level higher, it was actually the same level as the mirror back then, meaning there was really no advantage. The only quote-unquote benefit of this card was having the privilege of playing the same card twice in a row. Paying one extra elixir for a card was certainly not worth it in almost any scenario, but it actually gets worse than this. Card scaling worked differently back in these days, meaning all cards started at level 1 regardless of rarity, meaning a level 4 epic was the same as a level 7 rare, which was the same as a level 9 common. But the mirror didn't take this scale into account, meaning a level 4 mirror would spawn a level 4 epic, a level 4 rare, or a level 4 common, which would equal out to a modern day level 9 epic, level 6 rare, and level 4 common. This meant a max level mirror would only spawn a level 8 common, so this meant mirroring commons and rares was far worse off than mirroring epics. But even mirroring epics was a bad idea because you were still getting less value for your elixir. Seriously, what was Supercell thinking when they released this card? Although the card wasn't in a great position, it actually wasn't as bad as you'd think. When I was reading through the history of these balance changes, it certainly seems like the card was dead from day 1, but there's important context we need to consider here. Part of it definitely is contributed to players just not having the knowledge to utilize the power of stronger cards. But there was actually a major bug with the mirror that made it quite stronger at the time, which I don't think many players realized was even in the game at any point because players were not attentive to small things like this back in 2016. Pay close attention to this clip and see if you can spot the bug that happens with the mirror.
For the King Tower, I guess. I really want to, okay, double Goblin Barrel the King Tower. Let's see if I can get that, make that happen there.
Remember how I said it cost one additional elixir to play a card with the mirror, and that's kind of how it's been for its entire history? Well, that's only how it was intended to be. With further research, I found that this was actually not the case at the game's beginning. This bug with the mirror made it where it would only deduct the elixir value of the card you were mirroring instead of deducting that one extra elixir. It looked like it would deduct the proper amount of elixir, but this was actually just a visual bug. As you can see from this clip on the screen, it takes the elixir but then gives some of it back instantly, essentially eliminating the penalty of playing the mirror. This was actually something I didn't know at all until researching for this video. I found out after reading the patch notes and by looking back at old footage. It seems like this wasn't just something that happened occasionally, it happened during every single occurrence that the mirror was played. Although using the mirror on commons and rares were essentially useless still because you're still paying the same amount of elixir for a much lower level card. However, mirroring epics really had no penalty because you were paying the same amount of elixir for a card of the the same level as the mirror. This made way for some Troll Goblin Barrel decks and some Double Witch decks to be quite popular. Although I don't even think people even realized that the mirror was bugged at the time and they were just trying out these combos and they were working, so they just kept going with it. Although I did notice the bug in a lot of different YouTubers' footage, no YouTuber around this time even mentioned the bug. I have no doubt today that people would notice this bug pretty fast, but back then more advanced strategies like elixir counting weren't really a thing yet. Now, why would Supercell release a card like this originally? It's so easy to look back retrospectively and think it's obvious that a card like this was always a bad idea from the start. This card is always going to be paired with the most overpowered cards in the game, making those cards a nightmare to deal with, leading to a toxic meta. But if you make it a lot weaker to compensate for that, which is apparently what Supercell did, then it just isn't going to be viable or appealing. My theory is that when this card was designed, the true value of just one elixir in Clash Royale was underestimated. Even nowadays, you see people casually mentioning that a card's elixir cost should be increased to make it balanced, not realizing the large impact just a one elixir difference can make. I mean, just look at how much the Monk's position in the meta has changed with just a simple elixir cost increase and no other stat changes. Supercell likely didn't consider how big of a deal one elixir could be, so they didn't think it would be a big deal at the time of designing the mirror. Another way we can tell Supercell did not have the value of elixir fine-tuned yet was that if you look at the original cards released, nearly 1/3 of them have a different elixir value today. Lots of cards had their elixir cost reduced because it was understood that a one elixir difference was making a lot of these cards not viable for their higher elixir cost. One of the other possible reasons that the mirror exists is that it was just an easy card to create. Think about it. The mirror didn't require any work outside of just making a card art. No special animations, no additional models. It's just a way to pad out the number of cards by doing a fraction of the work. Games do this all the time. You'll see in fighting games, for example, adding characters with very similar movesets so they can pad out the roster while not having to take the time to create brand new animations. With Clash Royale being a brand new game, they had to release the game with a good variety of options, and reducing that workload with a filler card seemed like an easy opportunity. The difficulty to balance was likely not considered with this card as well. Nowadays, it's seen as a problem if any card has a low use or win rate in Clash Royale, which it is, but to a greater extent in 2016, a card being underpowered wasn't seen as the same way as it does today. Remember that this game was being heavily based on Clash of Clans, where in that game, making sure every troop and building were balanced to each other just wasn't as much of a concern. People just accept in that game that certain troops are better than others, and some troops are just not worth using after a certain point. I don't know too much about Clash of Clans, but from what I've seen, I see the state of the game balance is taken much more seriously now in Clash Royale than Clash of Clans. So these are all the reasons as to why I believe the mirror is here and why it was released the way it was. But now that the mirror is here and it's not going anywhere, how is Supercell going to fix this monstrosity? Now let's take a deep look into these changes this card has received over the years. Within the first month of the game's existence, the mirror would receive its first change. On February 2nd, 2016, the mirrored level of commons and rares would be increased to scale better, but not perfectly. A level 4 mirror would now spawn level 8 commons and level 6 rares rather than level 4 regardless of the rarity. However, a level 8 common and a level 6 rare was still equal to only a level 3 epic, so why would they scale it partially but not all the way? Well, the answer is likely due to the epic rarity having a higher max level than the other rarities. According to the level scale at the time, a level 8 epic was equal to a level 13 common and a level 11 rare. However, level 13 commons and level 11 rares were not in the game yet. How would a mirror be able to spawn a card of a level that didn't exist? This is likely why the levels didn't scale correctly with the mirror. A flaw that seems obvious today, but remember back then this game was based heavily off Clash of Clans, whose leveling scale is complete chaos and not consistent. This was likely the mindset when it came to levels in Clash Royale at first. Remember, there was no tournament standard at the time either. Even friendly battles had you using your own card levels. Mirroring a common card to get one level lower for +1 elixir cost was still a horrible deal, even though that bug of not deducting the proper amount of elixir was yet to be patched. On February 29th, 2016, also known as the March update, the mirror's bug of not deducting the proper elixir would be fixed, which greatly impacted the card's strength. Many players to this day believe the mirror was really good in the early days because of the fact that there weren't many cards in the game, which made playing the same card twice in a row worth it despite the disadvantage. But I firmly believe it was mostly because of this bug preventing the mirror's quote-unquote disadvantage. Again, I never heard anyone ever talk about this bug ever, so I can assume it's not commonly known. But I found clear evidence of it checking multiple sources to make sure it was real. With the mirror finally working as intended, it would certainly cause the strength of the card to weaken. But there was more to this update than simply a mirror fix. A new feature would be added to Clash Royale that would give the mirror some new opportunities. This update would add an entire new rarity to the game, the legendary rarity. This rarity was interesting because a level 1 legendary was higher on the scale than a level 1 epic card, meaning epic was not the highest rarity anymore, putting the mirror in a weird spot because if the mirror was level 1, 2, or 3, it would spawn a level 1 legendary regardless. You couldn't get lower than a level 1. Notice how I didn't mention a level 4 mirror here, despite a level 4 epic scaling equally to a level 1 legendary. This is because legendary cards had a unique function with the mirror that the other rarities didn't. As you already know, common and rare cards spawned one level lower on the scale, epics are mirrored equally, but legendary cards respawned one level higher on the scale than the level of the mirror. This is because legendaries had an additional level on its scale. The highest level a legendary could be was level 6, which would theoretically scale equally with a level 14 common, but of course the highest level a common could be was only 12. To ensure a max level mirror spawned a max level legendary, it would have to spawn a legendary of a higher scaled level than the mirror, which was a pretty huge deal. This meant there was actually a further advantage to the mirror than simply being able to play the same card twice in a row. However, the value of one elixir was so much that it really still didn't even seem worth mirroring legendaries. Mirror now was basically only being used in troll decks because it wasn't worth being used competitively. That one extra elixir that was required to spawn a troop of equal or even lower level was just not worth it in any situation. On top of this, only 23 days after this bug fix, the level of the legendary it would spawn would go down by 1, meaning now the scale of the legendary being mirrored was equal instead of +1, really kicking it while it's down. But oh well. A few months later, in May of 2016, the mirror would be given a small buff. Having commons and rares spawn one level lower and epics and legendaries spawning the same level was just inconsistent. Level 13 was finally added to Clash Royale, so now the mirror would be able to properly spawn them. This finally meant the mirror was consistent throughout all the rarities for the first time ever. Level 6 legendaries were also removed in this same update. Looking at this, I think the removal of level 6 legendaries might have been directly tied to the mirror's existence. Think about it. If Supercell wanted to keep the consistency of the mirror and level 6 legendaries, they would have to add level 14 commons, level 12 rares, and level 9 epics, which would hinder a lot of progress and likely upset the player base. They clearly didn't want to add a 14th level, which they actually deconfirmed soon after this, meaning removal level 6 legendaries was really the only other solution. However, this was still just a consistency change, so now it made mirroring commons and rares just as worth it as mirroring epics, which was still pretty worthless. It was clear that simply being able to play the same card twice in a row was not enough of an incentive to have to pay one extra elixir, especially as new cards were added. Mirror sat as a practically useless card for the summer of 2016, so in September of 2016, the mirror would get a pretty significant buff. The level of any card mirrored would now spawn one level higher than the mirror. This was a really unique buff because now, especially with an actual tournament standard, having a card that breaks the consistent leveling system made mirror all the more unique. This did allow for some unique interactions with the mirror, such as mirrored goblins being able to survive a zap or mirrored Sparky surviving a rocket. This seems like a really unique and interesting buff that would give the mirror some utility that other cards in the game could not provide. Many players were excited that this card was seeing some love and expected this card to at least have a niche place in the meta. This buff would also do something unprecedented, which would add a new level of cards only previously seen by legendary cards, meaning now a maxed mirror could spawn level 14 common cards, level 12 rare cards, and level 9 epic cards, which are levels that never existed, except for theoretically the first week of the game's history where a maxed witch and goblin barrel would supposedly spawn level 14 troops. The reason I say theoretically is because the wiki says they did, but I have yet to find proof. The reason I'm skeptical of this is not just because of a lack of video evidence, but because an update that came about a month later in November accidentally removed level 14 troops, making a level 8 mirror dysfunctional, forcing a maintenance break a day later to make a level 8 mirror function as a level 7 mirror for about a month before they fixed it again. But how does an accidental removal of level 14 in November of 2016 prove that it didn't exist in January of 2016, you may ask? How does Supercell accidentally remove something like this? So basically what happens is Supercell usually develops multiple versions of the game at the same time, and new features will be added to each version. And both of these new developed versions are based off the last complete version of the game. Let's say version A does not have level 14 cards, then Supercell adds them in version B. Note that this balance change came with a full client update. This was not a typical balance change maintenance. Anyway, version C was still developed while version A was the live version, so version C does not have level 14 cards since version A didn't. Now, to make sure content isn't missing in version C from version B, what Supercell is supposed to do is eventually add the live content from version B to version C before version C is released, but sometimes they forget. I'm not sure if this is the first time Supercell did this, but I certainly know it wasn't the last. Something similar also happened in September of 2019, where Supercell accidentally left a different version of the Executioner in the newer version, which wasn't the same as the one in the game previously, making it even buffer than it already was at the time. This means we can confidently imply that level 14 troops were only added when the mirror was buffed in September of 2016. There is a small chance they simply could have removed it entirely from the game's code in between January and September of 2016, but I've been looking for proof of that for months, so I'm fairly confident in my theory. However, it was clear that this buff was still not quite enough for the card even when it was working properly. Even though you were getting buffer cards, that +1 elixir was almost never worth the investment. Why bring a mirror in your deck when you can just pack a log and a zap together? The interactions that mirror uniquely benefited from were still deficits. If you mirror a zap on a goblin barrel, you're not really benefiting from that. If you mirror your fireball to kill a musketeer, your opponent is still gaining an elixir advantage from that. And a 6 elixir witch would just never provide value at all. No matter what you mirrored, it would always set you back. And remember, technically the mirror has the most versatility of any card. You can literally make it a building, a spell, or any troop. It can function in so many ways, yet none of them were worth doing. So yeah, allowing a max mirror to spawn unobtainable levels was cool, but not compelling to competitive players. This card was certainly going to be a tough balance. It got a total of 7 balance changes in 2016 alone if you count the maintenance fixes, and the only other card that got balanced this much in the first year of the game was the Witch. You know when you're being balanced as much as the Witch, you're probably not a healthy card. With not many options, only time would tell the fate of this card. In early 2017, Supercell would release a list of ruled out features in Clash Royale, and on this list, Supercell officially confirmed that a ruled out feature was a mirror rework. That's right, they decided that the mirror would never be receiving any type of rework ever. The list was last updated in May of 2017, so I'm not exactly sure when this was confirmed, but it had to have been in May of 2017 or earlier. This sent a clear message to the community. Mirror was acknowledged to be an extremely weak card, and Supercell had no intention in making it competitively viable. This card idea was a flaw from the start and should have never been added. However, Supercell could never really delete a card, and I know people will mention that the heal spell was deleted, but that was at least replaced with another card of a similar concept. What would you even replace the mirror with? And please don't comment Mirror Spirit. This card remains fun as a gimmick card during this period. Seeing how many Dark Goblins you could have on the field at one time is always a satisfying thing to see, and goofy clips like this would just be much harder without the mirror. But this is how the mirror would continue to be. A joke. A gimmick. But it wasn't completely out yet. In May of 2017, the Night Witch would be released into the game. This card was completely unprecedented in Clash Royale, being the strongest card a card had ever been up to that point. This card was so blatantly overpowered at 4 elixir that some would say that even at 5 elixir, this card was still good. This meant the mirror was finally competitively viable, but only with the Night Witch. This card was so incredibly strong that mirroring this card would not put you at a disadvantage like it would with other cards. Although the mirror wasn't exactly flooding the game, it started to see itself being used in multiple popular decks with the Night Witch. However, the skill of this card was really just a matter of getting as many Night Witches on the field as you could. Although many people were focused on the Night Witch herself, it was still incredible watching the mirror at this time winning grand challenges and actually having a solid niche place within the meta. I wish I could show you the use and win rates, but anything from 2017 or earlier is nearly impossible to find. But I can certainly say there are videos of people winning grand challenges using the mirror during this time period. The mirror at this point became a tool people used to justify a card's strength. It was said by many people that the mirror was so bad that if a card worked with it, it was in emergency nerf status. This was pretty much true to an extent. Expensive cards often weren't worth mirroring even when overpowered, and some cards just didn't synergize with mirror, if that makes sense. Even other OP cards like Royal Ghost didn't bring out a lot of mirror despite a use rate of 40% and a win rate of 60% in grand challenges. Even with cards that were significantly better than average, the mirror just sucked. Really, the only reason it somewhat worked with the Night Witch was because the Night Witch was incredibly more overpowered than any other overpowered card during their time in the spotlight. Now, the only real change the mirror received in all of 2017 and 2018 combined was not allowing it to appear in your starting hand, which actually made sense considering the mirror was the only card in the game you couldn't play as the first card of the match. This change obviously did not change the function of the card, but just reduced the RNG element of what appeared in your starting hand. However, looking at other cards' balance changes, it really did seem like Supercell was encouraging the use use of mirror by making card interactions different based on one level. A mirrored log would kill archers, a mirrored barbarian barrel would kill a princess, a mirrored zap would kill stab goblins, and to me personally, it seems like Supercell was adding a lot of fireball bait cards into the game to try to encourage a fireball bait meta, which would maybe somehow encourage people to use mirror fireball. That one might be a bit of a stretch. Despite the game having numerous fireball bait metas, it never really encouraged people to mirror the fireball. Most people just never even considered mirror. Oh, also in 2018, they simplified card levels, so now I don't need to keep saying scaled level. They had already confirmed no more reworks, and what other changes could you even make to this card? The only other suggestions I really saw was making the card the same level, same cost, or making it one level lower for the same elixir cost. Now, same level, same cost never sounded appealing to me, as it would just encourage the spam of overpowered cards and have nothing unique to it. But making the mirror spawn a card of one less than the mirror of the same elixir always sounded like an interesting change to me, but both of these would fall into the rework category, which of course Supercell confirmed wasn't happening. Now, you can't really lose all hope, because Supercell also said we'd never get a healing card or clan wars, but as the years went by, Supercell always continued to show no interest in touching this card. In 2019, this card would get one more significant change. However, this was mostly cosmetic. Why do I say mostly? Because this did affect how easy it was to counter this card in some scenarios. After this cosmetic change, whenever a mirror was placed, an animation would play symbolizing that the card being placed was a mirrored version of the card, which would go on to hurt some of the mirror's synergies. In certain situations, playing mind games and being unpredictable can play a key part in victory. Part of the power of cards like Goblin Barrel is the difficulty to tell exactly where it's going to land, and how it's impossible to tell exactly where a miner is going to pop up. With this new mirror animation, it made it incredibly easy to tell where somebody placed these cards. This animation was actually removed in the Magic Item update in early 2021, but then was brought back in the summer update that same year. Although there were many changes to mirror over the years, the function of the card remains the same as it had been since September of 2016. This card was practically dead in competitive play since competitive play had been introduced going into 2021, with the exception of the Night Witch era. A card left to be dead for over 5 years was nothing like we'd ever seen in Clash Royale. Some would even use the term silent removal to describe this, a card that was nerfed so bad and never buffed on purpose. So although players could still technically play it, it wasn't worth doing so in almost any scenario. Were they really just going to keep letting the mirror stay dead? In October of 2021, a big update came to Clash Royale, adding another top new rarity. This rarity worked much differently than your typical rarity. One of these things that made champions so special compared to the other rarities was that there could only be one champion in the arena at a time. This caused a potential problem with the mirror, because the mirror's job is literally to have multiple of the same card in the arena at one time. This left Supercell with no choice but to forbid compatibility with the mirror and the champions. Now, they could still be used in the same deck with each other, but you could not use the mirror on the champion. So what would show up in the mirror's slot when you played a champion then? Well, it actually let you mirror the card you played before the champion. I thought this was actually really cool because it allowed for some much needed flexibility with this card. However, did it really matter? Its core function remained almost exactly like it had been 5 years prior, only adding one additional level to the card you were mirroring for +1 elixir. Now, it wasn't necessary for me to bring this up for what we're about to discuss, because in April of 2022, something happened that nobody would ever expect. When the balance changes were put out, one card would be on that list that had been absent for several years. Well, I guess technically it was 2, since the elixir collector was also on the list after being absent for several years as well, but let's ignore that for now. The mirror would finally receive a buff. Almost 6 years since its last functional change, the mirror would finally be given some additional help. The community was absolutely pumped to see that this card that had remained dead for so many years was finally getting some attention. It was given a change that had never been tried before, which got people genuinely excited to play this card again. It would now add 2 levels to the card you were mirroring instead of just 1. There was so much possibility with this card now. Remember, you can put mirror in any type of deck and mirror any card in Clash Royale. There were 107 cards in the game at the time. There was so much possibility. This buff would lead to what would be an interesting meta in April of 2022. When this balance change went live, mirror was being played in just about every archetype extensively to find out which deck it would work best in. Its potential synergies was being extensively tested. It really was an exciting time for Clash Royale. It almost felt like a new card was being released into the game. People were finally appreciating mirror's versatility. But this excitement quickly turned to frustration. There was a massive exploit that shot up in popularity within the first couple of days. Remember how I mentioned that only one champion could be in the arena at a time? Well, this led to a major problem in the game that still plagues the game to this day, which is called 3-card cycle. Usually when you play a card in Clash Royale, you have to play 4 cards before it's put back into your hand, but if a champion is in the arena, you only need to place 3 cards before getting back to your original card. This led to a strategy of people cycling Earthquake and Mirror on the Princess Tower. This strategy really had no counterplay, as when you mirrored your Earthquake, you only had to play 2 other cards to get back to your Earthquake when you had a champion on the field, and this could easily be done with 1 elixir cards. This led to an emergency nerf of the Earthquake only 4 days of these changes going live, so that the amount of damage Earthquake did to Crown Towers would go from 85% of its full damage to only 65%. This seemed to work pretty well in stopping this. But okay, a little bump in the road, so what happens next? After just a few days, its usage rate was up to 20% with a decent win rate. It's hard to say exactly what the mirror was being used with the most at this point. Trying to immerse myself back into this time period, most of the decks I saw being used with mirror were bait decks and giant skeleton decks, but there were videos of tons of people succeeding with mirror in just about any archetype. Even looking at popular decks from this time period, mirror wasn't even among the top ones, and over time mirror's use and win rate slowly fell as the hype died down. But it was certainly in a better position than it was, and wasn't just sitting at the bottom with Barbarian Hut and the Wizard anymore. It was predicted by many that this card's future was going to be with bait decks, as now the mirror could be used to overwhelm an opponent with even more swarm cards. Although it did seem like that's where it was going, the community was in for a rude awakening. Remember when I said expensive cards typically didn't work with mirror often? Well, emphasis on the word typically. The timing of everything that happened was a bit unfortunate. In the same balance change as the mirror buff, Electro Giant was receiving a rework. Its elixir cost would be lowered to 7, with its damage and health being nerfed by 15% to compensate. What you should also probably know is that when a Troop levels up, the only stats being affected are its health and its damage. Each level buffs a card's health and damage by 10%. Another thing to note is that the Electro Giant was still somewhat strong before this change. This meant an Electro Giant 1 level higher only did slightly less damage than an Electro Giant 1 level lower before the update. Now when you factor a 2 level difference to that, you end up with an Electro Giant that did more damage and had more health than before its rework. Since a mirrored Electro Giant would only cost 8 now, this meant that a mirrored Electro Giant was essentially just a pre-balanced buffed Electro Giant. Now, one thing I will note is that this rework to the Electro Giant actually made it a pretty weak card. The card ultimately did not have a good use or win rate. So even though a mirrored Electro Giant objectively provided more value than the old 8 elixir Electro Giant, you'd have to spend 7 elixir for a bad Electro Giant, which obviously you can't do if you're not going to get some value out of it. So why am I bringing this up? Well, we're getting there. Because Supercell loves to ensure that only the most toxic cards remain viable, Electro Giant slightly underperforming for a season required immediate attention to ensure that this would no longer be the case. So come June of 2022, the Electro Giant would receive a 9% health buff. Remember that a health buff is more significant for the Electro Giant than the majority of cards, because more health means it also deals more damage to the troops overall. Also, as a tank, it already had quite a bit of health. As you may have guessed, this buff made the Electro Giant quite popular. Not to mention, a mirrored Electro Giant now had so much more health for the same amount of elixir that the pre-April 2022 Electro Giant had for the same elixir. You could imagine adding up all these factors, it added up to a not so fun meta.
We have one of the most shocking new meta strategies that abuses the new most broken card in Clash Royale. And that of course is Electro Giant Mirror Super Fast Cycle. With the new health buff, the Electro Giant is so strong that players have realized that you don't even need a real strategy. Just slap in a mirror for a +2 card level and throw in some cycle cards to literally spam endless overpowered Electro Giants. And throw in a champion as well for the 3-card cycle, and you have the recipe to abuse one of the most busted cards in the game right now.
Remember how the Earthquake got nerfed after just 4 days of being too strong with Mirror? Well, the Electro Giant would not be getting any type of emergency nerf whatsoever. For 2 months, the meta of Electro Giant and Mirror would plague Clash Royale. Also, as players kept playing with Mirror, they learned that mirroring most cards still wasn't worth it at 2 levels. The biggest problem with Mirror was becoming apparent. Mirror only worked with some cards, and it was only making the most toxic cards more toxic. Another 2 months later, in August of 2022, the Electro Giant's reflection damage would be nerfed, but only the damage it deals to the tower. This was still a 33% nerf, so it was very significant, meaning the card phased out, but nobody was really complaining. So now how would the mirror fare without its primary partner? April 2022 was poor timing for the Electro Giant rework because it ultimately led to the mirror and Electro Giant working too well together. But that wasn't the only card that got a poorly timed buff that season. The Giant Skeleton also found himself receiving some attention. He was given a pretty generous buff, which seemed at the time to balance out. People were excited to see Giant Giant Skeleton being used again since his popularity had been waning before his April buff. This Electro Giant nerf made way for the Mirror and Giant Skeleton to find each other as great partners for the August 2022 meta. Although it had been already being used before, it wasn't a mainstream meta combo until the Electro Giant was taken out. Giant Skeleton and Mirror started appearing all over the place. In fact, this one specific deck at one point was in 8% of all matches during its peak, and that's just one specific variation. Giant Skeleton and Mirror were everywhere. The next question was really apparent to Supercell. Would Supercell keep nerfing the cards that worked well with Mirror, or was it finally time to bite the bullet and end the Mirror's brief time in the spotlight? These last few months made something very apparent. Giant Skeleton and Electro Giant were actually not that strong without the Mirror. They were certainly in need of nerfs regardless, but they weren't really game-breaking in themselves. These cards were just a little too strong, and Mirror was taking advantage of that by exploiting their power to an extreme level. The meta with Electro Giant and Giant Skeleton Mirror were just so toxic, and players were just so sick of it. Before 2022, Mirror really only worked with game-breaking cards, and now it was powerful with just slightly above average cards. With CRL coming up, Supercell saw no other choice but to revert Mirror back to its pre-April state. In September of 2022, Supercell would do just that, putting this card back into a state they knew it would die in. This is actually not the end of the Mirror's story. Now, the logical thing would be to buff this card or just leave it alone, right? After all, we knew it sucked in this state because it had been stuck in it for years. But no. On October 26, 2022, Supercell would nerf the Mirror once again. In a deck with a champion, it no longer allowed you to mirror the card you played before a champion. If you played a champion, the Mirror would simply be grayed out in your hand, unable to be used. I would have preferred to see this nerf first before removing the second level because most of the OP decks anyway had champions in them. Mirror just wasn't viable in this state, so why make it even harder to synergize with other cards in the game? I really had to sit and ponder on this nerf for a while. It just made no sense to me. Just days before this nerf, the card had a 3% usage rate and a 35% win rate. It didn't even solve the problem of 3-card cycle. However, as I looked at the meta following this change, my question would be answered. After this balance change went live, the Mirror went from having a 3% use rate and a 35% win rate to a 45% use rate and a 57% win rate, making it the third highest used card in Grand Challenges, even surpassing the log. For over 5 months, the Mirror had been able to mirror cards at 2 additional levels, and yet after that was reverted on top of an additional nerf, the Mirror would hit its highest use and win rate it had ever had. This really surprised me when I first saw it. Never could I ever predict the Mirror in this weak state would have a higher usage rate than when it could spawn troops a whole additional level higher, no matter what it could be paired with. But it happened, and only a month after its nerf back to 1 level. So what happened? On the exact same day as this nerf went live, the Phoenix was released into Clash Royale, breaking the game, peaking at an 81% use rate, the highest usage rate a card has ever had in the history of Clash Royale. Remember when I talked about the Mirror being somewhat viable during the time period of the Night Witch being released, who was known as being the most overpowered card released into the history of Clash Royale? Well, it couldn't even compare to the Phoenix upon release. It was so powerful that even the Mirror, when it could only mirror cards at 1 additional level, had a higher usage rate than any other card in the game, except the Phoenix, of course. So how does this explain the October nerf to the Mirror? The nerf only affected play with champions, and the Phoenix was not a champion. It would have worked the same with the Phoenix either way. But the Phoenix was not the only card released on this day. A new champion, the Monk, would see the light of day as well. The usage rate wasn't even close to the Phoenix, but it was still used in more than half of all decks in competitive play with a great win rate. It was clear that it needed an emergency nerf with the Phoenix. 2 overpowered cards being released into Clash Royale at the same time was something so unprecedented. Most of the time, we don't even get 2 cards released on the same day at all. Several weeks after this update, it hit me. The Mirror nerf was a preemptive move to lessen the toxicity of the card, knowing it was going to be paired with the Phoenix and the Monk when they inevitably broke the game. Yes, I am stating Supercell full well knew the Phoenix and the Monk were far too strong upon release and that Phoenix Monk decks were inevitable. Although the monk could not be mirrored, the phoenix definitely could. And if the mirror had remained to the same with these cards being added, it would have allowed for phoenix to be mirrored even after playing the monk, allowing for those decks to be stronger and more versatile than they already would have been. Supercell didn't want the attention to be on the mirror, they wanted it to be on phoenix and monk. In the past, I've always been on the side of Supercell giving them the benefit of the doubt that they unintentionally released the Night Witch in an overpowered state. I also doubted that Supercell released the Elixir Golem in an overpowered state on purpose. When testing these cards out, it seemed like they had plenty of solid counters. But I just didn't see this with the Phoenix and the Monk, and many players pointed this out in the days leading up to the release when the official stats were made publicly available. Comparing Phoenix to the Mega Minion, a card with a similar function, it was clear before the Phoenix was even released that it was going to be a broken card. For just one extra elixir, you're getting 45% more health than a Mega Minion, allowing it to survive even a Lightning, 28% more damage per second with a faster hit speed so it could one-shot small troops like minions incredibly fast and be better at taking out tanks. It also had the same range as the Mega Minion, had death damage, and could respawn if not taken care of for 4 seconds after its death. The Phoenix even moved faster, and before the Phoenix came out, the Mega Minion was sitting at an average use rate of 5% and a healthy win rate of 55%. So it's not like the Mega Minion was a trash card. I think Monk's power would have been a little harder to tell just from testing, but if 55% of people can play this card for only 1 day and the win rates are already as high as 57%, I can't believe Supercell genuinely thought this card was balanced from testing. When the Elixir Golem was first released and that card broke the game, it peaked at a 35% use rate in competitive play, a whole 20% less than the Monk, and the Monk is a champion, meaning a lot of players, including a lot of casual players, couldn't even play it if they wanted to. If everyone had it, I think it would have been a lot closer to the Phoenix. I hope I made myself clear. Supercell doesn't care about the health of the mirror anymore and want to make any change they can without making it obvious they're trying to keep it out of the meta for good. I cannot 100% confirm this is what their mindset was because a lot of what I'm saying is using pieces of evidence to build a theory, but I think it's the most likely explanation and have given a strong argument to support this. To make myself clear, this is the only case in Clash Royale history where I think Supercell released cards to be purposely overpowered. They may have released other cards to be purposely overpowered in the past, but I don't see strong evidence in other cases. Preemptively nerfing the mirror and having not one, but 2 game-breaking cards released all at the same time is simply too much of a coincidence. With the Phoenix getting inevitably nerfed, the mirror fell back closer to its place it had been for years. Nowadays, the mirror is exactly how it was for most of its lifetime. With a rework seemingly still deconfirmed and 2 levels higher being proven unhealthy for the game, it's likely this card will always stay as a meme card or just used when really overpowered cards are added to the game. I did actually have one crazy idea to potentially fix the mirror, but it would require an overhaul to the game. Basically, what you would do is make the elixir generate twice as fast as it does now and double the price of every card in the game while capping the elixir bar at 20. Then keep the +1 cost for the mirror, but now +1 will be half of what an elixir was worth before, making it not as much of a sacrifice. This probably isn't worth doing because it would require a lot of overhaul, but hey, you want to fix the mirror or not? Mirror was just sort of added as a fun concept at the beginning of Clash Royale's lifetime, which couldn't have been considered unhealthy for the game because nobody could predict the climate of the game today back then. It certainly had its brief periods in the spotlight, and I think the only time we'll ever see it again is when Supercell releases an overpowered card into the game, which they totally don't do on purpose. But Supercell only released 2 non-champion cards in the last 2 years, so it'll probably be a while. I hope this video gives you a good idea on the mirror's journey in Clash Royale. If you want to know what I personally think about the mirror, I really think they should bring back the 2nd level. For a while during this 4-month period, the mirror's use and win rates weren't that bad, and with the champion exploit being patched, it wouldn't be as strong as before. But it appears Supercell has deemed this card as too much of a risk to keep viable. But let me know your thoughts on Mirror and what you believe the future should be for this card. Maybe the next step could be finally updating the card art in the upgrade screen. Also, let me know what card you want me to cover next and subscribe so you don't miss it. Thank you all for watching, and have a good one.